lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today I have Fabian Nicieza. If you read comics in the 90s, you read a comic by him without a doubt. I mean, you're on most of the comics I've read as a kid, so it's a huge privilege to have you here, man.
My pleasure to be here, Ryan.
When I'm interviewing somebody for the first time, I always like to hear their story. Like, everybody's different. How they first got into comics as a kid. What started their love?
Mine is pretty normal for the immigration story. I came to this country when I was 4 years old. First thing my brother and I recognized was really Batman and Superman comics. Between the TV shows airing at the time in the mid '60s, we saw the comics on the news racks in Queens and New York. So we bought some comics, and we kept buying comics. And because my brother and I both drew, because my father, although my father was an engineer, he was also very artistically inclined, so he encouraged that. And so my brother and I drew and told stories and read comics from the time we were little, and it helped us learn how to read and write English a lot faster when we first came.
I know that when you started as an intern at Marvel, correct?
No, I got a job at Marvel Comics in 1985. That was 2 years after college. I worked at Berkeley Putnam Publishing, which is a paperback hardcover book company that's now owned by Penguin Random House, like everything is. And I worked there for 2 years. And as often happens, a friend of a friend had a coworker whose sister was looking to hire an assistant at Marvel. So I had interviewed at Marvel and DC right out of college, but I didn't get either job because I didn't have the experience they were looking for. But I'd actually gone through several rounds of interviews at both companies. So 2 years later, I applied for her assistant's job in the manufacturing department of Marvel Books, which is a completely different thing than you might even imagine it is today from what it was then. We were doing Fisher Price licensing books, so we were doing activity books and sticker books and coloring books. The only real tie to Marvel Comics that the Marvel Books manufacturing department had was that we were doing Marvel's press posters, which were these 22 by 34 large, gorgeous posters that Marvel was doing 4 posters every quarter, and some of them were original pieces of work, some of them were some of the better covers done up as posters. So that was kind of the only tangential tie that we had to Marvel editorial. So I got a job as her assistant, and 4 months later, I stabbed the poor woman in the back and I leave because there was an opportunity to become the assistant to the guy who got the job instead of me in 1983. His name is Steve Saffel, and he worked in the promotions department, and he was hiring an assistant because the workload had grown immensely. So he hired me to be his assistant, and I transferred over to the other department, which is where I really wanted to be because I went to college for PR and advertising communications degree. So I really wanted to work in PR and advertising, and I thought doing that at Marvel would be perfect for me. And Steve didn't know that when he was hiring me, there was someone being hired over him in a directorial capacity. So in essence, within a month, we became a mini department, and we became Marvel's promotion and publicity department, merging with the existing publicity director. And I became Marvel's advertising manager a year later. The new boss, Mark Erickson, just wanted to see what all of our strengths and skills were. So Steve became promotions manager. I became advertising manager in 1986. So I was responsible for all of Marvel's house ads, promotional posters, giveaways, store co-op ads, flyers, anything and everything that was promoting our comics, either in our comics or mostly in the direct market, I was responsible for. And I did that job in-house from 86 till I think 91 when I became an editor. To this day, it's still blurry to me when I switched over from promotions to editorial. I think it was, and I became an editor for Marvel's licensed books, and I did that roughly until 95. So I was on staff for 10 years.
You know, like I said, anyone that's read Marvel comics in the 90s, you know, much like myself, like we read books by you. You were one of the main X writers for a very long time. well, a large chunk for me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I was wondering how you went from like doing all the promotion, and you were doing editing, how you landed that gig writing the X books.
How do you get to play Carnegie Center? Practice, practice, practice. I'd been writing. I sold my first story in '87. It
Mhm.
was a issue of a New Universe book called Sci-Force, and I kept selling stories pretty consistently after that. Sci-Force became my first monthly book in very short order fashion, a little faster than normal, and probably faster than it should have been, because there was a lot of turmoil happening at that time editorially and in the books. So I wrote Sci-Force monthly until issue 34 when all the New Universe books were canceled. And then I did a whole bunch of inventory stories and backups, annual backups, and then Marvel Comics Presents was green lit around '88, and that was a real good opportunity for a lot of us to try to write who were trying to improve and break in more as writers because they had such inventory needs because it was going to be a weekly book. So I wrote a dozen or more Marvel Comics Presents stories. Some of them didn't appear until 3-4 years into that book's run. Right?
Oh wow, okay.
Now 3 years, I should say, into that book. Now it can't be that long because it's a weekly book. Your time frames gets all screwed up.
Right.
This way, there were stories that didn't appear until like issue 70 something of Marvel Comics Presents that I wrote when the book was first starting to amass its inventory pile up. That's how much
Wow.
he had to commission. But there was great experience for all of us, all the assistant editors, anyone else who's looking to try to write in-house or at a house, because the 8-page stories were a real good opportunity to show what the hell you're doing, because you got to tell a beginning, middle, and end in 8 pages.
Mhm.
The comics back then were 22 pages. So all of that combined with my advertising manager work was making me very well known internally. I was friends with the editors. I worked with them on a daily basis with my day job, and they all saw that there was some writing talent there, that I could produce work on a timely manner, et cetera, et cetera. The real key for me was not X-Men. The real key for me was New Warriors, because when I got New Warriors when it was going to launch, that gave me the opportunity to solidify myself as a writer, internally and externally. Because that book was a success, because that book sales increased throughout its entire first year, because that book's reception among fans and critics was far better than anyone expected it was going to be, because the book had really been run down and badmouthed before it even launched.
Right.
All of that went a long way towards me making a name for myself as a writer who could sell a book. So retailers now thought of me as someone who could sell a book. Editors now thought of me as someone who can take chicken duty and make it chicken salad, and that helped me the most. And then I accepted an Alpha Flight assignment from the same editor, Danny Fingeroth, who was editing New Warriors. Not that I had such passion for Alpha Flight, I didn't, but I wanted to prove that I could write 2 books a month and still keep my day job, because that's when editors go, well, he's writing a book a month, can he do 2 or can he do more? And I wanted to prove to them that I could do more work and still have my 9-to-5 job and do that. So I did Alpha Flight for about a year before I quit it. I wrote 88 through 101, I think I wrote, issue numbers, and then I quit it. At the same time as I was doing Alpha Flight and New Warriors is when New Mutants happened. Rob Liefeld was going to be plotting and penciling the book. They needed a scripter, and I was one of the candidates, and they offered me the assignment, and I said yes, because quite frankly, scripting off other people's plots is usually easier for me. The
Mhm.
plot is more work for me than the dialogue is, and back then everything was done plot first, as opposed to nowadays where everything is done full script. So I started scripting New Mutants, and that gave the editor the opportunity to know that I could turn stuff around quickly when necessary, and his office required a lot of things done quickly when necessary. So
Yeah.
by the time all the Image debacle happened, and first the Chris Claremont stuff happened, then the Image stuff happened. They needed a fresh start on a lot of the books because a lot of the creative teams had to be replaced, and because I was already pretty deeply immersed in the office by that point, having written scripted New Mutants and X-Force for over a year, having written annuals for them, having helped him out when he needed bailout scripts or whatever. Then I was given the full writing chores on X-Force, which was a very kind of logical step to take. And then I was also given the X-Men title, which was never really given to me as if it was going to be my regular assignment for that long. The first 2 issues I did, which was issues 12 and 13, I think, were actually technically inventory stories or schedule help. R.T. Bear was going to draw a 2-parter, and then we were going to decide what was going to happen, because we just needed to catch our breaths with the Image guys leaving, our schedules being in the shape that they were in. And I just ended up continuing to write it. It was never technically, to this day, I don't think that Bob Harris, the editor, ever said, "I want you to be my X-Men writer." I just kept writing it. So that's when you were young enough to be reading stuff and getting into it. But it was a 5-year road to get me to X-Men. Is what it amounts to. And it was also not necessarily a road I was looking to take. I would have been perfectly happy not writing X-Men just as much as I was writing X-Men. Any passion I had for the characters in the book were from when I was 14 years old or 15 or 16 years old, and that was Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum and John Byrne. That was that time. The book had become an institution by that point. So by the time I was 30 years old, it wasn't necessarily an assignment that had a lot of positives to it. It had more negatives to it than positives, just because of the weight that having to follow up on Chris's 17-year run means, So really, the fact that it was the #1 book Marvel published, and the fact that it made really excellent royalties and incentives, it was as much a financial decision on my part as it was a enthusiastic creative decision.
You talk about, the whole Image guys leaving, right? And like that period of like 92 and like up until like the whole speculator thing, like with Wizard magazine, speculator boom, and then with the industry almost kind of like imploding. What was that like as a creative, as an editor, like watching this happen? Could you guys foresee this like happening with like these really inflated numbers, everybody buying like, because to me it's really interesting. Like I'm going back and like I have old Wizards, so like I could see like now as an adult, like watching like how everything is like going up, and you have the price guides and the prices are jumping all over the place. What was that like for you guys behind the scenes? And did you know that it was kind of inevitable that this was eventually gonna like come back down?
That is a 6-hour conversation to be had. Wizard back then was basically the equivalent of what Fox News is now. It tells you the narrative it wants to tell you, and oftentimes it's telling you that narrative for its own purposes. So there were a lot of guys who worked at Wizard who were enthusiastic comic book fans. There's no doubt about it. Many of them are still in the industry today. But there was also an absolute mercenary nature to a lot of the editorial choices they made, and those mercenary nature was who they could anoint with power and or who they could profit. That's why the magazine was always problematic, because it was half real enthusiasm and half bullshit, selfish greed, and that's a bad combination to have in publication that was selling as many copies as it was selling back then. So it didn't drive the totality of the publishing. Obviously, it couldn't, but it certainly influenced what you, as a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, were thinking, and that's not good, because you should influence yourself based on what you discover, what you reach out. I grew up without any of that crap, and I read the comics that I wanted to read, and I made those choices by looking at them on the stands and getting yelled at by the store owner. "This isn't a library, kid. Get out of here!" And then making those choices. Well, as a kid, from the age of 10 up, my choices included Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith's Conan, and Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel, and Marshall Rogers and Steve Englehart on Batman. And then as I got older, Frank Miller on Daredevil, and Alan Moore and Twisted and Toddlebin, on Swamp Thing. Those are choices I made completely on my own, completely by looking at the material and seeing that there was something in it that intrigued me and interested me. It wasn't because some editorial board sitting over lunch and sodas were deciding who they thought was hot and not hot, and what they thought was good and not good. So to me, it's a world of difference, and I'll take mine over yours any day of the week, because
Yeah.
I don't want someone else making my choices for me when I don't even realize they're making those choices for me. That's exactly what Wizard was doing. You tell me, how can I be writing the number one selling comic book in the industry for 2-3 years, and I'm only on the hot writer list, like 6 times, like in a 2-year span or something, right? That's bullshit. And the bullshit is that they want to determine who they can profit from, and that meant pumping up things like Valiant and certainly Image, which was well deserved because the popularity of the creators was going to warrant that kind of thing. So it's very problematic. We knew that Wizard was just a tiny percentage of the reality of our publishing at the time. Wizard aside, those of us in the company knew that the growth was not sustainable, but the growth was being enforced upon us by people outside the company, meaning the owners of the company, the new owners of the company. That had much more to do with things that had nothing to do with the comics themselves, or the artists, or the writers, or the characters. That was simply high finance people looking to leverage their investment and increase the value of their investment as their means to parachute out with as much money as they could have. That's exactly what happened. The boom and the bust of the industry was not necessarily because retailers over-ordered stuff that we were pumping out. Okay, that was absolutely a part of it, but the bust in the industry really happened because the owners of Marvel wanted to increase the value of the company to an exponential degree that the company's sales could not support. So as a result, they got a leveraged debt on a company of hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they claim it's bankrupt. That's not because the company itself still wasn't making money. A company makes money based on how much it sells versus how much it spends, okay? Marvel is still making plenty of money all the way up to 96 or so off of what they sold versus what they spent. But the minute that your owner buys a trading card company, another trading card company, a toy company, an Italian publishing company, a distribution company, and accrues hundreds of millions of dollars in debt on those purchases, that's all being placed on the company itself. And they're doing that in order to get the stock price to go up, which it did, that they can sell their stock. And that debt on the company is burdened onto the company itself, which had Marvel Comics had nothing to do with any of those choices. That was all scumbag billionaire Ron Perlman and McAndrews and Forbes that did that to us. The idea that the industry was bankrupt is such a fallacy to my mind to this day, and I discuss it, I explain it, I'm fine to hear opposite points of view, but very few of those come from people who were actually there at the time. But it exhausts me, quite honestly. First of all, because it was 30 fucking years ago, so who gives a shit? And second of all, because the amount of misinformation and lack of understanding and awareness that's out there on this particular subject is galling. And I'm not talking about it from a historical perspective. I'm talking about it from a hysterical perspective, because I'd already left Marvel by that time. I was gone in 95-ish. But I got dozens and dozens of friends who lost their jobs. I got and lost their careers in some cases, and they were very good at what they did. I watched comic shops close down all over the place, and many of those are retailers I may have known. I watched distributors shrink down from 7 distributors in the country to 1 distributor in the country, which was to the detriment of comic shops and comic sales in the country. So I watched all of this affect hundreds or thousands of people Okay,
Yeah.
and it's all the result of the greed of just a few men. And that's the absolute truth. It's the greed of a few men that caused all of that to happen, and they walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars in their pocket. Okay, and everyone else who's doing the work, everyone else who cares about the industry and cares about the platform, they lost out. So people who talk about it today don't really quite understand it that way. They don't see it that way. They don't get it. And they don't get the forces that drove and manipulated so many of those things. And Wizard is backing up to Wizard. Wizard's actually a part of the problem. They were a part of the problem. They weren't a part of the solution. Okay.
Yeah.
So you ask me what I feel about all of those times. I feel it was a bunch of fucking assholes who raped an industry, walked away laughing, and that includes Wizard.
Dude, thank you. I love that. I mean, I could go on and listen to you talk about this. I don't think it's funny what happened, but I absolutely love comic books and I love every aspect of the industry. So it's just, and I think that a reason that the topic got brought up or got more to my attention recently too is because we see what DC kind of was doing with starting their own distribution companies, right? And I saw it because I work at a shop, so I'm seeing it from the retailer side and how it pissed off a lot of retailers.
Yeah,
because they did it during the pandemic. One, number two, you also had competitors being the distribution companies. One being Midtown, which is no longer doing it, and then you have Lunar with the one out of Texas. I can't remember the name of the shop.
Yeah, but look, I don't follow the industry much anymore because I'm not really that much a part of it anymore. If I had a 9 to 5 job at Marvel or DC, I'd be a lot more invested in knowing what's going on, but I'm not. I don't care that much. From a perfunctory look at what was going on, how DC handled what they handled was absolutely questionable. That DC wanted to do the things that they wanted to do is not questionable.
Agreed. Agreed.
So
yeah, no, I agree with you.
And to me, a retailer complaining about DC being distributed by Midtown Comics, which has an absolute complete distribution network all its own, it has almost nothing to do with the comic shop itself, is to me is just retailer whining that I've been hearing since the mid '80s. You're talking to a guy whose job it was to create flyers and sell sheets to help promote a cash register co-op program in 1986. Okay, that's where the retailer could get an electronic cash register for their store in lieu of credit. So they were only paying half cash out, and the rest was going to be given to them in comic book credit. All of it was because we wanted to get them out of the cigar box era. Okay. And half the retailers we're trying to sell to in 1986 refusing to participate in the program because they were afraid the cash register that we were selling to them was going to control their sales. And we're like, what? Yes, Marvel will control the cash register so that every time I sell a Batman, it'll ring up as a power pack. And these are words I heard come out of retailers' mouths. Okay, so in 1986, I came to a very simple conclusion that I have not deviated from in 30 years. Retailers are a cowardly and superstitious lot. So you can't listen to them anecdotally because oftentimes their individual perceptions of things are really flawed. So if DC is trying to create its own distribution system apart from Diamond, I don't inherently find anything wrong with that. On a business level, because Diamond in essence became a monopoly for the comic book marketplace, and it shouldn't be. And you're talking to a guy again who comes from a day where there were 7 distributors all over the country, some large, some small. Diamond and Capital were equal size and equal weight and importance back in the 80s, right? So I don't see the disadvantage of multiple distributors and retailers having a choice of who they're going to order from. It's more work for the retailers. I get it, but it could be better competition, give them better discounts, give them better service, and I know all this because I lived all that. So,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
whatever happens. I don't care. I'm a book writer now.
Yeah. I thought it was a monopoly too. That was my first instinct. I'm like, that's good. There should be more than one distributor. It was more just the timing of it just seemed kind of shitty. But, you know, in the end, I think that like I unpack the boxes every week. So I actually prefer Lunar. I think they pack their books a lot better. There's a lot less damages. Diamond, sometimes it looks like they throw the comic book from across the room into the box, or sometimes they try to make origami out of the comic books, like literally how we get books from Diamond. So yeah, I mean, it's always good to have competition. I think that breeds better quality in terms of what you're getting from the company. I did want to ask before we jump into some of the new stuff that you got going on. Like for me, some of my favorite works that you did were Thunderbolts, Red Robin, and Cable and Deadpool. And I was wondering, what were some of your favorite projects to work on up until recently, going from like the first books, Cyforce, up to current stuff?
New Warriors is and will always be number one.
Okay.
And that's because of what it meant to me, both professionally and emotionally. It was really good, fun times, really good working relationships, really good, deep, meaningful relationships with long-term with the editor, Danny Fingeroth, with Mark Bagley, so it was Derek Robertson, all of that. It bonded us in a great way because we were all like forged in the same vat. A book that no one thought was going to be any good, that we as up and coming guys new to the industry, we made our bones on it. It was our mafia killing. We successfully killed our way into the gang, you know, and that's why it'll always be number one. I have a real fondness for a lot of my Thunderbolts run. Sometimes it was a little tumultuous, but I love the characters so much, and I loved working on what I call a super chewy granola Marvel Universe book. The nature of the book and the nature of the characters that I inherited from Kurt Busiek really gave me the opportunity to do what I love to do, which is in long form storytelling, really map the course of life changes for several long-standing Marvel characters. And I can use all of their long-standing history to do that. And that's why I enjoy Thunderbolt so much, besides getting to work with Mark and with Pat Zerker and with Tom Grummett, all of whom are fantastic artists and great storytellers, which is vital when you're doing a team book. Cable and Deadpool is probably my number 2 or 3 title in my career, because I got to salvage 2 characters that had been put through some questionable choices over the previous few years. They're characters that meant a lot to me, and I really got to do whatever the hell I wanted in a corner. Nobody was paying attention. Most people at Marvel didn't even know we were publishing a book called Cable and Deadpool. And I could, after years of editorial, shall we say, involvement in my writing of the X universe, Cable and Deadpool was the first chance I got to just write what I wanted to write, my story, with a good young editor whose life I made miserable half the times because I kept getting her in trouble. Nicole Booth was great, and I got to work with a lot of good artists again, and a really good run with Pat Zerker, and then a really good run with Riley Brown, who I'm still working with to this day on my Outrage digital comic. So Cable and Deadpool means a lot to me, not the least of which is because I cast Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool in issue number 2 back in 2004, way before he even signed on to play Deadpool. So that's my claim to fame, is that I cast Ryan Reynolds, which means I can email him anytime I want to his top secret email address, and he'll usually respond to me within an hour. He'll respond to me. I keep that card close to the vest. I don't use it very often at all, but believe me, I'm going to use it when my book comes out in a few months. So all of those books mean a lot. My work at DC was very sporadic and odd. I never got a real chance to have a run on anything, but for the same token, I got to write almost every character they have as a result of the kinds of books I was doing. I got to write back stuff at a time of really exciting turmoil in the books, because Grant Morrison was just being Grant Morrison, and that was really kind of fun in a crazy way. I love Tim Drake, so getting to write Tim Drake twice was wonderful. I regret getting New 52 out of Red Robin tremendously, because I could have written that book for 10 years easily.
You're preaching
because
to
I
the
like
choir. I
Yeah, I
love
like
Tim
Tim Drake a
Drake,
lot.
and that
Yeah,
pissed
yeah.
me off when that book went away. So
Yeah, they've done a really good job of doing a really bad editorial job on a lot of their characters. I respect the prolonged, consistent excellence it takes to make the wrong choices with so many characters over such an extended period of time. It's not easy to do. As hard as it is to make the right choices for characters over prolonged periods of times, it's just as hard to make the wrong choices over prolonged periods of time. So
yes,
DC's editorial, and it's not fair I'm saying this because it sounds like I'm not going to lump Marie Javins into this, because she's got her job to do moving forward. But Dan and Bob, the previous regime, they did a wonderful job of screwing up a lot of excellent characters, and Tim Drake is pretty much close to the top of the list. Although I'm sure Wally West fans would have a lot to complain about.
Let me raise my hand. I am a Wally West fan because my first comic book was Flash '82 by Mark Waid, so he's my favorite DC character. And
okay, that's good. That's good.
I have been absolutely pissed for years at the handling of Wally, and Dick Grayson too. Dick Grayson for a minute too was just kind of, I don't know what they were doing with him. Wally was the worst.
We'll talk about the Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson's my favorite character in comics. Robin Nightwing is my number one character in comics since I was 6 years old, because the Batman TV show was on, and that was it. I couldn't be Batman when I was 6, but I thought maybe I could be Robin, so I immediately gravitated towards him. As someone who reluctantly participated in the Rick Grayson scenario when I scripted the first 6 or so issues, I think it was. And by the way, I quit at least twice during those 6 issues. And I didn't read anything after my issues. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I like any of how it was done, but I will sit here and defend the idea of the story, because the idea of the story is no different than Don Blake losing his worthiness, or the Thor losing his worthiness and someone else having to become Thor. It's no different than Wolverine losing his adamantium, and we find out he has bone claws, and they got 75 issues out of that kind of a storyline.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with the concept of Dick losing his memory up to the point where his parents were killed. That's kind of interesting. Then it just is what you do with it. And like I said, I'm not a big fan of what they did with it in the stories I was involved in, and I have zero idea what was done after, because I didn't read any of it. So I can't speak to its quality, but I'll defend the concept, because when you're writing monthly books, you're putting out sausages every single month, and some months those sausages are going to be a little bit better than other months. That's normal. But by the same token, sometimes you got to look at your sausage and go, let's try some different ingredients in this. Mm-hmm. We've given them feta spinach sausages for 3-4 years now. Let's just try some red pepper and bacon in the sausage instead. And all of a sudden, we want to see if they like bacon and red pepper sausage. Let's see what happens. And maybe they'll like it, and then you can give them bacon and red pepper sausages for another couple of years. That's just inherent to the nature of monthly publishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it just lasted a little too long, because like you said, the idea of it, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Like, Dick got shot by KGBs and like he lost his memory. I kept waiting. I'm like, okay, when is he gonna come back already? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it just went a little bit too long, in my opinion.
And I did some basic research, even though I wasn't plotting the books, and I did some basic research into memory loss through trauma, especially bullet wounds, and because I knew Scott wouldn't be doing any of that research, Scott Liddell. So there are cases where the memory never comes back, and it's sporadic at best for the rest of your life. So that whatever memories you retained plus the start of your new life is who you are. So
Mhm.
there's something to be said that's plausible, that you could approach it that way. From a comic book writing standpoint, the only reason you would approach it that way is if your sales went up and the reaction was really positive and you were engaged as a reader going, wow, okay, I really didn't think this Rick Grayson stuff was going to be good, but wow, they're doing some interesting things with him. He's still Dick Grayson, but something happened to him and he's a little different. That's cool. So if that were to happen, then guess what? You could have prolonged the storyline for 10 years before he gained those Batman memories, if it was good. You know, if it reverts back, it's because one of two reasons: either that was your plan all along, and in this particular case, I can guarantee you they had no plan for long term, because that's not how that editorial regime thought. And number two, it's switching back because our readers are pissed, our sales have gone down, and nobody's happy. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
those are the cases where that happens. You know.
Right. Well, let's talk about some stuff you're working on now. I know you got two things coming out. I'm sure you're already done writing X-Men Legends. You got coming up, which is a return to like the '90s storylines with Adam X. You're finally getting to tell a story like you originally intended. I believe in terms of like the Summers lineage and
Pretty close to it.
Okay, so I was wondering if you could kind of just I'll combine these questions. Just if you could tell us a little bit about what it's like to return kind of to that era, when it takes, and also kind of when it takes place, what stories you recommend people to read that maybe didn't grow up reading those but are going to pick up this book.
Okay. It starts actually with my unexpected return to Marvel. I've done some custom comics work for them regularly because I'm friends with the editor and he knows he can rely on me, and they're always interesting challenges to do custom comics for that department. And I tend to lean towards challenges at this age and this point in my career, mostly because I'm an idiot. So, write a 70-page, Black Panther Lexus digital comic in eight 10-page chapters. Okay, sounds interesting, So that's the kind of stuff I was doing for them. But I hadn't done any mainstream Marvel editorial work since the Secret Wars Age of Apocalypse, and that was a few years ago. In September of 2019, I got a call completely unexpected out of the blue from Jordan White, the ex-editor at Marvel. And he asked me if I'd be interested in doing a Juggernaut miniseries. And I had purchased the House and Powers miniseries that Jonathan Hickman was doing with the artists out of curiosity, not out of any consistent X reading at all. Any X reading I've ever done has been years earlier trade paperback reading.
Right.
But I had read the Hickman stuff, like I had just finished it like a week before Jordan had called. And my initial thought was, well, Juggernaut's not allowed on Krakoa, because at that time they were thinking humans were not going to be allowed at all on Krakoa. That was the working philosophy at that time.
Right.
I said, if he's not allowed on Krakoa, what does he do? And Jordan said, yes. and there it was. There was my miniseries. And I said, okay, great. What does he do when he can't be among the group of people he had started to kind of get back together with? Because in Rosenberg's X-Men run, apparently he was on the team. And then before I hung up, Jordan said, oh, and by the way, he lost his gemstone and was kicked into limbo the last time we saw him. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Jordan hangs up real quick. So that became a part and parcel of the whole storyline that turned into the Juggernaut miniseries, which I loved working on. It was a lot of fun. Everything I said about Thunderbolts earlier, the same can be said about Juggernaut. He's a character with a tremendous amount of history in the Marvel Universe that I've gotten to write a few times. I've never saw him as a rampaging, barreling beast, because for me, my defining issue of Juggernaut was always the Chris Claremont, John Romita Jr. X-Men, Uncanny X-Men issue where Colossus and Juggernaut got in a fight at a bar, and it was Colossus's fault. It wasn't Juggernaut's fault. So that aspect of a character like Juggernaut always intrigued me. And I touched on some of that in a miniseries I did in the early aughts called X-Men Forever, where Juggernaut was a main player in that. So getting to write the Juggernaut miniseries was great. I was kind of done writing it in January of 2020 before the pandemic hit, because I handed in my 5th script, and then we got delayed and everything else. and it went really well, and I was really happy with it. I wasn't that focused on comics through 2020 because I was working on my second book. And in the fall, I got a call from another editor, Mark Basso at Marvel, offering me X-Men Legends. And it was kind of a blanket invitation. Would you be interested in writing 3 issues in the first year of the book? 1 2-parter and a self-contained issue. And I said, okay, what's the deal? Does it count? Is it content? He goes, anything we write is in continuity. It's in canon. And
That's cool.
if you have any stories you weren't able to tell in X-Men back then, this is your chance to tell. I just laughed. I said, this every story I didn't have a chance to tell. The question is, are there stories I still have an interest in telling? I gave him 1 pitch for the 2-parter, which was Adam X, thinking that they wouldn't want to do it. And I gave him 3 pitches for a 1-parter. And I realized, quite honestly, looking through that entire run I had of X-Men, that there were not that many stories I wanted to tell anymore. The time and tide had kind of burned it out of me. It was a really difficult time for me creatively because my method of working didn't work well with the editor's method of working and with Scott's method of working. So I never got to write X-Men the way I write, the way I like to write, the way I think I write best. And as a result, I never think of my run on that book with any real fondness whatsoever, creatively speaking. So there's less things I'm interested in revisiting as a result. Adam X I wanted to do just because I felt that always got taken from me unfairly by editorial indifference, combined, quite honestly, and I've said it openly, with my own failings and how I did some things that I chose to do at that time. I never thought they'd say yes, and they said yes. And I said, this means that you're saying he is the brother. And they go, yes. And we just don't want to contradict anything that came after. I go, how could my story from back then ever contradict anything that came after when it was written before any of that happened? I could care less if there's 100 Summers brothers. The third brother was a construct of Wizard, quite frankly. I think it wasn't a construct of us. We never said third brother in print. We said, Sinister said brothers. That was it. That was it. Brothers. So Vulcan could be a brother. Anybody could be a brother if you want him to, but I wanted to tell the story of this kid. This was my Luke Skywalker for the X-Men universe story that I wanted to tell. It was originally planned as a 4-issue miniseries, which would have meant 88 pages of content. That's the rough notes I had still in my basement in loose leaf notebooks. And I had to reconstruct it for 2 20-page issues, which meant I really had to trim it down a lot, truncate it a lot. We got 10 more pages in the first issue because they decided to launch the title with the story. So I actually had to go back and rewrite issue 1 and add 10 pages to it. And it just gave us a little more breathing room. I actually could have used more pages in part 2. So it's 50 pages out of what would have been 88. So it's the same beginning, the same middle, the same end as what I always originally planned. It actually ends. It actually ends exactly the way I always originally planned it to end. And when you read it, you'll go, "Oh, okay. He was having his cake and eating it too. He knew how to get away with one," is what it amounts to. The only thing that I lost is a lot of the quieter moments. I lost the ability to have the characters spend more time with each other. I lost extrapolating and expanding an entire issue was going to take place on the Shi'ar throne world. I lost a lot of that. I had to condense. The beats are all still there, but I had to condense all those moments quite a bit. So my only concern, it's not even a concern, it's just a curiosity at this point, is does the story still play off as emotionally as I hoped it would have 25 years ago? Or because I had to truncate so many of the moments, does it come across a little too boom, 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 too perfunctory because I lost those slow down beats? And the readers will decide that. I can't decide that for them. It's all there. It's just not there in as not leisurely, not casual. That's not the right word, it's not there and as an expanded an opportunity as it would have been originally. Because originally it was a 4-issue miniseries. That was the plan all along. That was the request I made of the editor, and he said yes and never did it. So I even had Jeff Johnson back then was going to be the artist, and I even had a couple sample pages he did. I still have those pages to this day in my basement that Jeff did back then,
Nice.
and it never happened.
I'm very excited for it because like I look back at that time with not just like for nostalgia, but like that was when I got into comics, was in the early 90s. So I'm very excited to read that, and I love the X-Men.
I've noticed there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm among the man boys for this book, and justifiably so. I get it. I understand it. My problem with the man boys is when they're longing for what they want means that anything else that's being done is automatically either garbage or evil. That's my only problem with the man boys, is when they start whining about that. I have no problem at all with content being developed and produced for the man boy in mind. I don't like it when the man boys don't want any other kind of product or content to be produced.
I agree. I think that's a problem. Is like I see it in people coming in the shop where they're like,
sure, yeah,
I just want it to be this way, and I'm like, well, things have to move forward, man. You can't just like, it can't always just be that way. Like things have to evolve, things have to change. Like when they change the identity of a character, or they make Thor a woman, and you hear like the people complaining about it. It's like, well, that's a natural progression of a story that he's telling. It wasn't like he just did it to do it for the sake of doing it. You know what I mean? So I
get the complaining. I just find it odd that anybody at this point who've been reading comics for 25 or 30 years would complain about things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Instead of complaining about it, you choose to buy or not buy. I stopped buying books all the time back when I was younger because artists changed, or writers changed, or directions changed, or the teams that were working on it consistently started to lose me. I got less interested in it. I jumped on and off books all the time because of that. The only book I ever bought consistently from the 7 years old until the time I got a job at Marvel and I got it for free was Avengers. And Avengers went through some really bad times, and it went through some really good times, but I stuck with it because it was the Avengers.
Right.
But I don't get, having just finished reading the Jane Foster Thor things, because the digital app I use to download, like the library app, just got some of the Jason Aaron Duderman Thor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just finished reading her storyline. It was just so well done.
Yeah, I love it.
It was so well written, and it was so well crafted, and she was such an interesting character with such an interesting conflict. What the hell are you complaining about? It had everything. It had everything in it that you're supposed to want out of a superhero comic. So what are you complaining about? Because she got boobies? Thor used to have little metal plates on top of his chest. Those look like boobies too. Just like let it go. I find it mind numbing. I really do. And it's because I'm on the periphery of it. I'm not really engaged in it on a daily basis. That I judge it with a bemused sort of an outlook, not an invested outlook. So it's all good. I want them to enjoy X-Men Legends. They're gonna love Brett's art. Brett Nadelso's art is fantastic. He's who I wanted to draw this. I asked for him. He had just started to get some work from Marvel. He should have been getting work from Marvel all along. And when he agreed to do this, I was like through the roof, because he is the artist. It's a combination of Gil Kane, Art Adams, and Jim Lee, which is exactly what this story needed. And his art is perfect for it. So I'm really happy about that. I don't have that much of a vested interest emotionally in it once it's done. I don't, I'm not. I wrote my other script, which is a one-parter, which was actually an adjunct, a side storyline to an issue that I wrote way back when. So it's an interesting self-contained story that would have alluded to greater plans I had for the X run, which I knew I was never, by that point, I already knew I was never going to get a chance to tell stories the way I wanted to. So back then, that I couldn't do this side adjunct story didn't bother me as much because I knew it would never get the payoff I would have wanted. But writing it now was kind of curious because it speaks to a lot of the things that have happened since then. A lot of the Morrison stuff, a lot of the current Jonathan Hickman stuff. So, you know, I find that this side story that I wrote, that I had in mind in 1994, 95, would have led towards a lot of the kinds of things that they've explored since then. So there's no artist for it yet. I haven't even talked to the editor yet about it. I handed the script in a couple weeks ago. So then I'm done. I'm done with X-Men Legends. I'm assuming that's it, and I'm fine with that because I got other stuff I got to do, and it's not, you know, it's not necessarily a book that I feel like I need to be writing on a regular basis, even if it's an anthology form.
Nice. And then another book you got coming out in June is actually a novel. You got Suburban Dicks coming out. I was wondering if you could just, I know I got to let you go soon, but if you could just maybe give us like the elevator pitch to let people know about the book.
The elevator pitch is a pregnant woman who should have been an FBI profiler with 4 kids, a disgraced Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, a dead gas station attendant, a mystery that is hiding 50 years of secrets in a suburban New Jersey town. And that's the short pitch.
Okay.
It's a 34-year-old pregnant woman with 4 kids and the 5th on the way who solved a serial killer mystery in college, who found the murderer of a missing girl in high school, who has an affinity and an ability to see how things may have happened and at the time of a murder, and then work her way through it. And she had dated the older brother of a boy who grew up basically having a huge crush on her when he was 10 years old, but grew up to break a story while he was in college that brought down the administration of the New Jersey governor. And he won, along with the reporters at a larger newspaper that picked up the story, and he worked with them while he was still in college. He won a Pulitzer Prize in journalism for that group won a Pulitzer Prize in journalism when he was 22 years old. Now he's 29, almost 30, and he works for a weekly suburban newspaper in his hometown. The condo he bought with the money he made off of the book he wrote back in his early 20s is running out. The money's running out, and he's barely making any money, and he's bitter and unhappy. She's bitter and unhappy because she should have gone to Quantico. She should have been an FBI profiler, but she got pregnant the second semester of her senior year in college and decided to keep the baby. And before she had a chance to reevaluate her life, she was married, had a kid, and got pregnant with a second kid. And then that was all she wrote, as it were. So the two of them start to work together to try to understand why a gas station attendant was murdered. The police are saying robbery, but it doesn't look like it was robbery. And she stumbled on the crime scene by accident, so she saw the crime scene. And she's already seeing that what the police are saying is inaccurate to what she saw. And then she goes on an interesting roller coaster ride of trying to find out what it is that people are trying to keep secret. So that's it. I started writing it in late 2017. I finished it in early 2019. I cut all through 2019. I got an agent. And actually, it was ironic. The week that Jordan called me to offer me Juggernaut was also the week that the agent called me and said they wanted to represent the book. They loved it, and they just had a few suggestions. so I took those suggestions into account and rewrote a bunch of stuff. And they took it out in November of 2019, and we had 5 publishers who wanted to buy it, which was fantastic. I never expected it ever. In a million years did I expect that it would have gotten into a bidding war among top publishers in Manhattan. And I ended up choosing the what became a 2-book deal, because as the offers escalated, so did the opportunity to, well, we'll make it a 2-book deal. Okay, I like that. So I ended up choosing Penguin Putnam. So Putnam is the hardcover imprint that will be publishing it. It'll be published in the UK market under Titan Books. 2 different covers for the 2 different editions. It comes out June 22nd. We have a TV option already for the manuscript. That the TV stuff was being discussed at the same exact time as the book was going out to be sold, and we got great response from TV producers, and we signed a deal with a destination platform this year, but I can't announce it yet because they want to get a showrunner attached to it before they announce it. But
Okay.
fingers crossed it turns into TV in 2, 3, 4 years. And I finished the second book in November, and right before we got on our call, I was tweaking the second manuscript because I had to cut out about 20,000 words before I submit it to my editor, because he's going to ask me to cut another 10,000 words. So I've been doing that, and it's great. I love it. I wish that I'd had either the confidence or the skill to have done it a long time ago, but I don't know that I had either. And I just feel maybe it took me a long time to get to the point where I could handle prose and do it justice. And the reception to the first book, which is called Suburban Dicks, has been great. We'll see what the reception to the second book is. It's the same story world, same characters, new murder mystery, and I hope it becomes a series. I would love to write more in this story world, which is basically the area I live. So I had a rule going in: no tights, no fights, no flights, and I stuck to it. There in neither one of the first 2 books is there any kind of superhero garbage. There's not even a chase. There's not even a car chase. One gun gets drawn, but it's a 78, 80-year-old man drawing it, so he can't even chase the guy down. I guess my reporter in the first book is driving a Prius, and he can make a getaway in a Prius, then the threat wasn't that bad to begin with. So I just wanted to write. I wanted to write an adult, non-comic booky thing, and still infuse it with what I hope is my sense of pacing, my sense of humor, for sure, because there's a lot of humor in the book. It's a dark comedy book, quite frankly, and tell a story that I've wanted to tell. Talk about Adam X. I had this book idea since 1994.
Oh wow! Okay.
Beginning, middle, end, and the title. And I never had the confidence to do it, and whenever I tried to start it, I wasn't happy with it. And which was the case with a lot of my prose attempts. There was just something about this time and place that allowed me to keep going and have it click. And I still learned a lot with the first book because I overwrote like freaking crazy. I overwrote like an idiot. And the second book is much tighter to what it needs to be than the first one was. I cut out over 150 pages from the first book.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was awful. This one I'm cutting maybe 30 pages through rewrites, through cleaning and tweaking and getting rid of excessive verbiage. So it's I'm hoping if I get to keep doing it, maybe by the 5th or 6th one, I'll have a clue what I'm doing and I'll get it right.
Well, I'm very excited. I mean, the synopsis that I read sounds very interesting. I can't wait to pick it up. I'm always looking for a good novel because I read enough comics, on a daily basis. So it sounds really cool, man. I'm very excited.
I appreciate it. And if you read it, you can pre-order it now, baby. If you read it, you will, and you've read my work in the past, you'll absolutely say that's Fabian writing it. That's cool. That's funny. You'll get me in the book. Even though there's no Deadpool or there's no Thunderbolts, even though there's no superheroes, you'll absolutely get me in the book because the narrative tone is arrogantly, knowingly snarky. so that's me through and through. So you'll get that in the book, and I think you'll like the characters because they're interesting, conflicted characters.
Awesome, man. Well, I know I gotta let you go, so I want to thank you again so much for joining me today. And if real quick before we get out of here, if you could just share with everyone watching or listening where we can find you online And I will also drop the links down below, as well as the link to pre-order the book.
Oh, appreciate it. Best place to get me is on Twitter, at Fabian Nicieza, my whole first name, my whole last name. I answer DMs on Twitter, as Ryan knows. The secondary place is on Facebook, except I got 1,000-person wait list, and I've been too lazy to do a fan page. So I'm on Facebook as Fabian Nicieza. Those are the two places that I mainly go. I have an Instagram account, but I don't go to it that often. So Twitter is the best option. Facebook, you'll get to see everything I post and all that stuff. But if you ask to be my friend, I may not see you on my scroll list. Facebook really has to improve how they do that. So there's people who've been on a waiting list. I've been on a waiting list for 2 years. I was like, I got no idea, and I got 5,000 friends, so I can't add too many more. So anyway, hit me on Twitter. That's the easiest way to find out what's going on, what I'm doing, how much I used to hate Trump. Now I don't care anymore. Stuff like that. You'll get that through my Twitter.
Awesome, man. All right, cool. Well, again, thank you, and I can't wait to do this with you again sometime, man.
I appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you very much. Look
All
forward
right,
to
man.
it.
Yeah, have a good
Take
one.
care.